playoff choker, locker room cancer, fat suit, quitter, and more. James Harden is one of the most polarizing players in the NBA this season, and really ever. After making his third trade request in 3 years, Harden's been the poster boy for everything wrong with the player empowerment era. The dogpile around him peaked when the Clippers lost their first 6 games after Harden joined the team last year, and it really looked like the man was actually washed. Even as a Harden fan myself, for a little bit, it was getting harder and harder to defend the guy. But since that losing streak, the Clippers have gone on a super dominant run, going from a 6-game losing streak to a 9-game winning streak, and are now sitting at a comfortable 4th spot in the Western Conference. Now that it's been a few months since the trade, I think it's time for me to stand on business and make a defense of the whole Harden trade saga.
I am not
System player.
I am
The system.
I'll cut to the chase. I don't think Harden deserves the hate he's gotten over his multiple trade requests. I think every time he's requested a trade, he's had valid reasons to do so. So let's add some context to each one. When the 2020-21 season started, back in December 2020, it was no secret that Harden didn't want to be in Houston anymore. Russell Westbrook had just been traded to the Wizards for a past his prime John Wall, and the Rockets were looking bleak. The team was worse than the one that just got dismantled by the Lakers in the bubble a few years earlier. Like, look at this roster. A washed John Wall with Christian Wood and Trevor Ariza were just not it, Chief. This group was destined for the 6th seed and a quick first-round exit, and it was clear that the Rockets' front office just didn't want to make any big moves, which I think was unreasonable. Harden had just made his 6th All-NBA first team. He was still able to contend with a proper team around him, and we all knew that because in the first 3 games of the 2020-21 season, Harden averaged 37 points per game on 52% from the field and 45% from 3. This clearly showed what he was still capable of, but Houston kept dragging its feet on a trade, so Harden's numbers went down in his later games. Now, I'm not trying to justify Harden's bad play in his last games in Houston. I am trying to say that the front office could easily have seen this level of play and decided to run it back with this weak team, and so they needed sort of a push to get there. I mean, why would Harden waste that season fighting for his life for a play-in spot? All things considered, this was a perfectly justified trade request. And so, in January 2021, the Rockets ended up trading Harden to the Brooklyn Nets for 4 first-round picks and 4 pick swaps. This was a great return for the Rockets, and also an opportunity for the Beard to finally contend for a championship. As an aside, after Harden left the Rockets, they finished last in the Western Conference with only 17 wins that season. And also John Wall ended up playing only 40 games. I have a hard time believing this would have been any more than a 40 to 45 win team if Harden did stay. So in the end, he did have a point in leaving. Okay, so now we move on to the Nets era. In Brooklyn, Harden continued his all-star level play, but this time with fellow offensive weapons Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. So he didn't have to carry the team the way he did in Houston. He was allowed to reduce his scoring and focus more on playmaking, where he truly shined. Now the big 3 didn't really play many games together, only managing 16, but they usually had at least 2 available, one of those usually being James Harden.
Of course!
And speaking of availability, with a team as offensively capable as the big 3 Nets, really only injuries could stop them. And injuries did stop them in the 2021 playoffs. In the first round, the Nets swept the Celtics, but in the first minutes of the second round matchup against the Bucks, Harden went down with a hamstring injury. The Nets still won the game, but then Kyrie went down in Game 2 with an ankle injury. These 2 injuries basically ended the Nets' chance for the title, but the team still chose to run it back to start the 2021-22 season. This was when things started to fall apart, as Kyrie refused to get vaccinated, which forced him to miss the first half of the season altogether. This was a big problem that only got worse when Durant got injured with a knee sprain, missing 20 games in the first half of the season. This put all the load on Harden to carry the team, which was not the situation he signed up for. Personally, I think the Kyrie saga was especially frustrating for Harden. Regardless of why Kyrie was out, the fact is he was sitting out, and Harden was the only star showing up, which had to have been annoying. Now, in the middle of the season, Kyrie did start playing road games, but his general unreliability and KD's constant injuries meant there was no guarantee that the big three would ever be healthy for a consistent period. So once again, it made perfect sense to me that Harden would want out of Brooklyn. He was the only consistent star on the team, even if his hamstring injury was still slowing him down. After a long losing streak, in February 2022, Harden was traded to the Sixers in exchange for Ben Simmons. This return for the Nets, for James Harden, seems like nothing today. But at the time, no one knew how much Simmons had regressed as an NBA player, so there was some debate as to which team really won the trade. In fact, the Nets were still seen as potential contenders after this, but they ended up in the play-in tournament and got swept by the Celtics in the playoffs. And as we all know, it wasn't long before KD and Kyrie requested trades and left the Nets as well, which showed the inherent unreliability of the team and showed me that Harden did end up making the right choice in choosing to leave. Meanwhile, Harden made an immediate impact on the Sixers, helping them go 14-7 in games he played, and getting them to the 3rd seed with Joel Embiid. The Sixers would beat the Raptors in 6 games in the first round, and faced the Miami Heat in the semifinals. Embiid got injured against the Raptors, so he wasn't 100% in the second round, and the Sixers would lose to the Heat in 6 games. But even with a loss, the team could still look forward to a full season of Harden and Embiid playing together. So the 2022 offseason is super important in the Harden trade saga, because this is when the Beard took a pay cut of around $15 million when he re-signed with the team. This allowed the Sixers to add more depth in free agency, including former Rockets PJ Tucker and Daniel House. Harden voluntarily cut his pay to help the team, and with an understanding that he would be given a max contract in return the next year. And this arrangement did pay off in the beginning. The 2022-23 Sixers went 54-28 and finished 3rd in the Eastern Conference again. Harden averaged 21 points, 6.1 rebounds, and a career-high 10.7 assists per game this season. He actually led the whole league in assists, proving he was still a capable star. And the Sixers, as a team, were looking pretty good. They swept the Nets in the first round of the playoffs, but in the process, Embiid got injured once again, so Philly entered the second round against the Boston Celtics with little hope of advancing. But in a shocking Game 1, without Embiid, in Boston, the Sixers won thanks to a vintage Harden masterclass. He scored 45 points on 56% shooting, including a dagger 3 in the final seconds of the game. This was Harden proving his worth to the team without his co-star. Now it's true, he had bad performances in games 2 and 3, but he redeemed himself in game 4 with 42 points. Unfortunately, the Sixers lost the next couple of games, and they would end up losing the whole series to the Celtics with an embarrassing game 7. Now this game was ugly, I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Both Harden and Embiid underperformed in a totally winnable game, but instead of looking at it as Harden choking and letting his team down and putting the blame solely on him, I'm gonna go out and say that the Sixers wouldn't have even been in that position at all if not for Harden performing at the level he was. It was a disappointing exit, sure, but there was good reason to believe that Harden planned to stay and the team could build on this. The Sixers even fired Doc Rivers to persuade him to stay, and also because Rivers sucked. So now we reach the 2023 offseason, and instead of following through on the agreement from the previous year, Sixers general manager Daryl Morey refused to give Harden a max deal. This basically meant Harden gave up $15 million last year for nothing. Now I know there was no binding legal contract or anything, so Morey had every right to break the deal. But I think you would agree, any rational person would be pretty mad at losing out on $15 million. Harden took that pay cut in good faith. So how disappointed do you think he was if all of a sudden he found out that he did it for nothing? Well, we got a pretty good idea of his disappointment, because once the max deal was off the table, he ended up signing a 1-year extension and requested another trade. And this is the trade request that really brought the hammer down on Harden. The dog pile was intense. He was a quitter, a diva, a playoff choker, you name it. Now to be fair, you could say Morey did have a point. You could say it would have been foolish to give Harden a max deal after yet another second round exit, which I totally see that point of view. But Morey was the one who made the deal in the first place, and then he broke it. And that's the issue here. It's not the fact that he didn't want to give Harden a max. As a matter of fact, even if you ask me, I wouldn't say that Harden necessarily deserved a max deal. But still, that's what he was promised in the end. Anyway, at that point, the relationship was finished, basically, and one way or another, he was going to leave the Sixers. Now, I do admit I would have liked to see Harden stay, because, as we see this year with the Sixers, playing under Nick Nurse is a lot better than playing under Doc Rivers. But at the same time, I can't blame him for asking out either. The negative vibes at this point were a little too much, and there was real potential of hurting the team's energy if he did end up playing to start the season. So Harden would skip training camp and media day, and sat out the first few games for the Sixers, even though he did appear on the bench one time. But just a week into the season, on November 1, 2023, the Sixers would trade Harden to the Clippers and receive role players in exchange. And as we all know, the Clippers would lose the next 6 games in a row. And as it's prone to do, the NBA community overreacted exponentially. For a few weeks, hating on the Clippers was the cool thing to do. Well, the cooler thing to do. When is it not cool to hate on the Clippers? But it got especially bad after Harden called himself a system, which rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, even though I think he had a point. Even just a few games in, people were saying the Clippers had to break up the team, which was wild to me. But luckily, Los Angeles quickly turned it around, and are now bona fide contenders. And given how effective Nick Batum has been in Philadelphia, I'd even say the Sixers benefited from the trade, as much as they could. Anyway, I think James Harden is a generational player, who's had a generational few years of controversy. Now don't get me wrong, he's not 100% blameless for every trade request. For instance, he could have given Houston a bit more time to trade him instead of practically tanking until they got rid of him. He could have waited just a little longer for Kyrie's vaccine requirement to end, and maybe have another playoff run in Brooklyn. He could have given Nick Nurse a shot before sitting out the first few games of this season and leaving the Sixers out to dry. All that said though, it's still clear to me that the 3 trade requests aren't as black and white as Harden being a quitter. Context matters. Right now the Clippers look the best they've ever been in the Kawhi and Paul George era. And like Harden said, all the chirping is suddenly gone. People will really pretend they didn't call for the Clippers to tear the team down after losing a few games. But I realize now I've gotten a bit ahead of myself, because those same haters, and me, and everyone really, we're all waiting for the playoffs now. Which, given the narratives around Harden, it should be very interesting. No matter if the Clippers flop in the first round, or go on to win it all, I'm sure we'll be in for another eventful Harden postseason. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, consider leaving a like and subscribe for more. And feel free to tell me what you think of the James Harden trade requests. Anyway, I'll see you later.